This computer.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So this is a overview of the architecture, infrastructure, and application areas of the Gitter application. The idea is that we gain some familiarity in the static site editor team around Gitter as a product, so that we can support Eric's work on this through through merge request reviews, and in such a way support him in the Gitter product in that way. So Eric, over to you.
Okay. So I tried to prepare this document as best as possible for the merge request reviewer in mind, but it was very difficult to like kind of summarize some of those points for someone who hasn't like gone in the code base at all. Like the easiest way to get familiar, of course, is just to like develop a feature, but I'm trying to get some more points around that could just like help someone out instantly. I feel like some of this documents more like getting someone onboarded onto the Gitter team more than familiar with the code base and like a good merge request review. But I was having lots of difficulties trying to get that right. So
I think that's fine. You know, like in the context of onboarding somebody is fairly similar to getting somebody familiar with a code base. So I wouldn't mind. I don't mind the direction you've gone in.
Okay. The first point is just some notes about getting the app running locally. The big thing that can save you a lot of time is using this create seed data script that Thomas wrote. It allows you to create an account in the database without having to set up the GitHub, GitLab, Twitter, OAuth applications, which is kind of messy to set up and lengthy. I think Twitter even has like a verification process now where like to get an app working, you have to like wait a day for it to get approved. So that's a bit annoying. And then a nice way to debug things is with the node-s inspect flag, and you can do that with the Gitter application by doing -dash inspect node, and then you're able to use the same Chrome dev tools that you're familiar with and be able to step through the code, put breakpoints, all that nice stuff, all for Node.js backend server stuff. There's a developer fact documentation that has some of the same points I'm going to go over, but is nice to like figure out, oh, I need to look at something on my phone. How do I get the Gitter web app running on my local network so that like I can access it across devices, not just on my local host machine, stuff like that. And then Gitter was acquired by GitLab back in 2017. And nowadays, just like Thomas is done with Gitter today, I used to work with him for about over a year and a half. But now I'm going to be starting as a sole developer again. Andrew Newgate is still at GitLab, and Mike Bartlett, they co-founded Gitter. And now working on other GitLab parts of the application. In the Gitter world, the main repo project is the web app, which runs the server and the front end code. It's a big mono repo structure. I always, like, this is the main thing I go to all the time. Like, I just type in web app in my browser, go to this, check out the issues, merge requests, and this is the main hub for everything. There's a whole bunch of other projects for libraries like the real-time client, but you definitely don't have to touch those as often. Mainly if there's like a security something around there, or you'll be discovering bugs in the web app, not in those client libraries, because you won't be using them directly that way. In terms of how the application works, there's a whole bunch of different clients, like the iOS, Android, desktop clients that interact with the server through like API requests, but also WebSockets, like a real-time connection going back and forth. We use a library called Halley, which is something that Andrew wrote, and it's based on the Bayou Fei like protocol, which is just a layer on top of WebSockets. It's just a way to kind of manage subscriptions with WebSockets as a standard. This is kind of how the infrastructure is set up. Like there's multiple boxes we have Nginx set up in front of them that just point to the different processes. So like there's a box for web apps, like this would be this one where it has web and API processes running on it. And then there's WebSocket servers, which is to have WebSocket processes running on them. And those are just load balanced out to the different processes. And there's 8 of each of these. So there's like 16 kind of processes handling all the requests on Gitter. So because Node is kind of single threaded, you have to like get everything flowing fast that way. We're using MongoDB for, this is Redis. We're using Redis for a bunch of different things. So some persistent storage, non-persistent, which should be maybe like maybe notifications or something like that. Caching is just like for requests, and actually Faye would be for the real-time stuff. But there's a bunch of different databases, I guess they call it Redis maybe. But I barely have to ever touch Redis. It's nice that the Redis stuff has been mostly fine.
What is Faye? That's one term I don't know.
The Faye Bayou thing is like, in my mind, the Faye and Bayou are like the same thing, and those are it's just a protocol on top of WebSockets. It's like a specification to be like, you can subscribe this way on a WebSocket, and then the server will answer your subscription. And it has some recovery stuff built into it. So like if the WebSocket goes down, it kind of knows how to get back and sync and figure stuff out. Elasticsearch for search. It's using this old Mongo river to sync like the database over to the search so that Elasticsearch can do its weird indexing magic on it and be fast. But that thing breaks every once in a while, so I hate that piece of the code basically. What else is there?
What is that last icon? That blue and green dot one?
I think it's Neo4j. I'd have to look up what Neo4j looks like, but I never worry about Neo4j. It's just, Neo4j is a suggestion service, which does like these relationship maps. So like, say someone joined the Node.js room, you're able to like suggest other rooms based on relationships around what they've already
like
joined.
when you join the Slack channel, it says, like other people in this channel frequently join these or so on.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a graph database, a non-relational database for Node, right?
I'm not sure. I haven't dived into it. I just know
I only know that
stuff.
because I looked at it once, but I never used it.
Okay. There is an API that users can use to like build their bots or make third-party Gitter clients. There's a few of them listed on the apps page. So we also have to worry about that sort of use case as well.
Is it used extensively by third parties?
I know that the free CodeCamp room had a cookie bot, which was super integrated into the room. Like they would give karma points to like people answering questions and how they interacted and stuff. And there was a bunch of different commands they had. But that's like the biggest sort of deep dive I've seen used into it. Other people use it for like archiving uses, like they have their Gitter room, but then they also kind of want it synced over to their site for legacy purpose so they can review it at any time in case Gitter is not a thing anymore. Like they want it available on their platform. So, and there's also bridges, which that people use the API for. So there's like Same Room, which can sync Slack across to Gitter, and Same Room has a bunch of different like bridges across different platforms. There's also Matrix, which is the other sort of big, what's the word for it? Federated chats. And they have bridges across rooms. Node.js backend. And the most important thing, like the code you'll be reviewing is most likely going to be JavaScript, whether it be backend or front end, normal stuff there. And this is the point about the real-time stuff. The Faye Bayou stuff is just WebSockets. What do you
use for tests?
testing is done with Mocha, just for Vue.js stuff. And then we have Cypress for end-to-end tests. And that just runs some, not like bare bones, but a few tests, like creating a room, sending a message, just to make sure that between releases, the app still works. And we can kind of be more confident, like it works on my machine, but it also works in CI. So that's nice to verify that things are working in another environment as well.
Do the end-to-end tests run against a live canary or staging environment, or do they run locally with some stuff mocked out or something in between?
They run like locally against the process that we start up.
And so the same as your local dev environment, all the Docker Compose infrastructure and everything?
Yep, and in CI would be the same Docker setup. It's just like GitLab CI services that you can run parallel to your job that hook in. I think it is possible to run against the other environments. Like you can just switch out the URL, and since it's kind of black box testing, you might be able to. There is a case of we have like a fixture endpoint that's very sensitive. Like it just allows you to create whatever you want for the testing wise. So like, oh, I need a user, just API request it and it creates it. So you wouldn't want to run that in production, but technically you could like add some authentication there and do the same thing. The desktop app and mobile apps. So the desktop app is using NWJS, which just wraps, it's just a way to wrap a web application so you can display like a URL page as like a seamless, frameless kind of application. But we're looking to deprecate that probably after the next major release that we're doing, just because the only time we ever look at it is when it breaks. So not the best of situations on that. The mobile apps are hybrid. There's like a chat view that you're able to see the markdown as in like a iframe sort of thing, the web frames that both iOS and Android use, because it's hard to like render markdown as like native components. But these are much more broken and like not as fun to work with. So they're also, since it's not just wrapping the whole web app itself, when we want to add new features like threads, we have to like think about adding it to the apps, and that's no fun. It just adds more and different work whenever you want to add something in the main web app. So
yeah, but soon we won't be, we'll be deprecating all of the apps, and we'll make a decision on that later this month about what the deadline for that would look like. And what we'll do is just critical maintenance like security and critical fixes like the authentication issue Eric fixed on the desktop app this week. But other than that, no feature development. And then after the deprecation period, we will no longer maintain it. We'll keep it open for the community if they want to maintain it. And if, but they will, our focus will totally be on the web app and driving that forward.
Cool.
And I just clicked through to those. So the plan is to have progressive web apps like to a viable state before we deprecate the web apps?
The plan is not to have.
Yeah, sorry, Eric, go for it.
I don't think the progressive web app will be like in place and totally featureful of like the same mobile and desktop experience, but I did want to add those in there to like allow people to track them so that they know like we're definitely thinking about it. But it's not going to be this. It's not going to be the same experience. It's just going to be, our focus is going to be on the web app because I can't maintain all platforms basically.
Makes sense.
Because the Gitter codebase has been around for a while, there's plenty of legacy aspects around it. On the front end, we're using Backbone and Marionette, which is sort of MVC sort of stuff and is not as fun to work with. But for all our new pieces, we're using Vue.js and Vuex. And we even server-side render both the old code and new code. The Backbone server-side render is a bit custom and like finicky. You have to update like multiple places if you add like a template or helper in there, but it works and makes the site nice to load right away.
So the one question I had on that area, and I haven't looked at this at all yet, so it may be dumb questions, but previously on the app I worked in, it was a Backbone focused, and then we tried to add parts of the React and ran into a lot of problems of just the way that Backbone works, which is essentially sort of a RESTful database type paradigm versus React and Vue, which have an event loop and assume a single immutable store. Those worlds just didn't live well together, and you ended up sort of getting in callback hell trying to debug the Backbone stuff or trying to make it work with the Vue, which expected sort of this immutable modify the data store render loop. Have you run into any of those problems, or is it just architected such that you don't?
Right now, our Vuex store is like a single store at the top level, and with some submodules which are like Vuex things. So like the left menu is like in the global store because it has all the rooms and stuff, but the threads are their own thing. In terms of
I guess it's more
problems,
like what's the source of truth? Is it the global Vuex store, or the Backbone models, or do they not have anything to do with each other, so it doesn't matter?
basically the source of truth is our live collections, which are more Backbone related. Like that's what we're using before, and we have a bridge over to the Vuex store where we like whenever something changes in those collections, we sync them up with the Vuex store.
So that's
Haven't
like a one-way thing, that a change to the Backbone store triggers an update to the Vuex store, which then lets Vue update its thing, and it's not
Yep.
a bidirectional thing. The Vuex store never tries to update Backbone.
We haven't had to do that. And the nice thing about these live collections is that if we do have to update data, say in the Vuex side, like we can just send it up the real-time connection and it comes straight back to the live collection to the Backbone stuff. So we don't have to like
okay,
cross.
so it's like looping through the server and coming back in through the Backbone collection, which then updates the Vuex store in the client, sort of.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense.
And so far we're not doing a global Vue application and mixing in Backbone components into it yet. Right now it's just single Vue components rendered in kind of the Backbone interface. We're still using the Backbone router in that ecosystem, but I can definitely see the end of like making the chat view in Vue.js, and then we can kind of convert all the way over to Vue.js completely and use the Vue router and nice stuff there.
Cool, thanks.
Other legacy stuff. The weirdest thing in the code base is that rooms are called troops in the code base. So there's the thing called like troop service, but that just means like room service. It's a legacy aspect of how the product used to be like was made, and it was called troop back in the day. And then they pivoted over to Gitter and open source and stuff like that. On this one isn't as weird, but a community it's called community on the user side and a group on the back end. The UI, a breakdown is like the left menu. This section is all in Vue nowadays. And there used to be iframes between the left menu and the chat area, but all that's gone once we switched to Vue. I migrated over to a single actual application, which is very nice because we had syncing problems between the iframes before. Right toolbar, so it's not called like the right menu or whatever. Right toolbar, I don't know. That's what we've been going with for so long. Chat area, chat header. pretty self-explanatory except for this one, I think, right toolbar.
It's almost like that's like a, a meta area for that chat area, that room.
Yeah, it displays information about the room. For example, if this was, it could also be repo information as like a tab on this thing that you could switch to and view how the connection was and different stars on the repo and stuff. The activity is like different integrations you can add onto your room. So this shows like the GitLab activity for the project, but you can add them for anything like Travis, Heroku deployments, a bunch of different integrations. And you can even have a custom one. Like if it's just a webhook, so just shove your webhook on it and it'll display whatever information. Infrastructure-wise, it's all stored in AWS on Amazon stuff. It's separate from the GitLab AWS org. And we don't plan to like migrate it over to GCP or anything. We have considered in the past maybe doing Kubernetes, but since everything's just working and not really worried about, we don't plan to actually use it or migrate it to that sort of stuff. Most of the infrastructure runs on Ubuntu 14, which is an unsupported LTS now, but we've just recently upgraded all the web app servers to Ubuntu 16, which is nice to see. I don't think there's a problem with it, but now that the work is done, if we need to do the upgrade on the rest of the fleet, then that'll be easier.
So the rest of the fleet is the WebSocket servers, and
WebSocket.
is the
Let's see here. There's a whole bunch of other servers,
okay.
like all the Redis and Mongo stuff would be
right.
still running Ubuntu 14.
Okay. Yeah, but the hope is also that we'll be passing, you know, ownership and support of the infrastructure over to, of the Gitter servers to the infrastructure team.
Yep, and we have
That's
issues to track.
Yeah.
Track the upgrades and stuff that could be possible in that case. We use Ansible to automate like the setup and scripting of servers. So all the stuff that happens after AWS creates the instance is handled by Ansible. It just runs like shell scripts and it has its own like YAML language for like setting up directories or installing stuff. In Terraform, we use that to manage AWS stuff. So like I want to create an instance, it knows the AWS config and all their proprietary stuff to know what to do there. So we can set up auto-scaling groups and manage that sort of stuff. There's still plenty of these boxes and like volumes and images and whatever stuff is still Snowflake one-off, like hand-picked, you know, scripting. But we definitely want to get more of it into Terraform eventually. And so far, we haven't had to worry too much about nightly alarm bells and in terms of like on-call. Really thankful to Daniela and Andrew for like keep making things robust that they can recover and not have a problem so often. I discussed this before,
What sort
but
of monitoring does it have?
we have Monit, which runs our own sort of checks. Like if it runs into the memory threshold, then we'll like send a PagerDuty alert out. I should stop sharing before I enter in the other thing, but I'm trying to log into GitLab on this computer. Okay. So we have Monit checks. What's a good one? Maybe this one. Like it checks if the CPU is like too high and then creates a PagerDuty alert. And there's also Datadog, which there's some alerts set up in there. So we send metrics and stats over to this, and based on like thresholds, we can create alerts. For example, Redis, there's just like graphs and there's like a threshold point that we can just alert on. One of the bigger metrics though for knowing whether Gitter is down is there's a 500 ELB check, and we can just see if we're getting a bunch of 500 errors. Great, there. I guess I'm not logged in there either. Okay. But just checking for 500 is basically on the app, and if there's a bunch of them, we know something's going wrong, and that's when we send out a PagerDuty alert for sure.
Thanks.
In terms of like logging and metrics and stuff, Datadog is our main thing. We do have a Kibana instance where like it aggregates all the logs, but it's an old Kibana instance, and the Elasticsearch syntax is not that easy to get through sometimes. Discussed this before. Thanks, Chad. We looked over the application stuff before, but there's a couple other diagrams if you're curious of how other things are set up more deeply. We have a thing called staging and next, which is where we put like upcoming releases on. And there's a document section about what it is, but basically it's just the same as Gitter.im. But if you go to this thing first and turn on next, then you get at the upcoming release. And this allows us to test on a smaller subset of users and make sure things are going right. And we can check Sentry before things go wrong.
With those feature flags on that next page, you can turn on and off.
Yeah, there's some feature flags. A lot of them should be just left at the default. And this one, for example, is known to cause bugs, so we add comments around it. There was more relevant ones before, like threaded conversations was here, but now that it's rolled out generally available, was removed from this.
Is there parallel infrastructure in some places on the back end for this, like a separate database or separate servers or other things?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by parallel, but there's like multiple Mongo instances, like 3 replicas.
Okay, for the I meant for the next version of the app, like if it had a schema change, is there like a separate next version of the database?
Oh, it's all running on the same database. So when we do upgrades like that, we just iteratively push stuff out. And because we can do continuous deployment, it's much easier to just like, oh, here's the first set of changes, plan it out, next one, and then migrate fully to it. So usually like if the code supports the new one old way at the same time, and then once all the servers are switched over to like the possible new way, we just remove that old support out of there.
Okay, so it's all handled through feature flags and incremental rollouts. There's not like anything that's like a dedicated, this is just for Canary, part of the infrastructure, or just for Next.
Correct.
Got it.
Another big piece of what I do day to day is community management support. So of course, GitLab issues that come up, people report bugs or have problems, want to rename stuff, handle them on there. Zendesk tickets, that's like just the email service that people can send to. It's support@gitter.im. There's not as many nowadays because we've added some features to allow people to more self-service, but there's still like help requests that require a chunk of time. The main chat room, support room, people come there to discuss like features or report their bugs.
Does the community kind of like help each other resolve bugs?
Yeah, just recently someone was asking about how can I find my messages in search? And then someone came in there with all their fancy Elasticsearch queries because you can kind of put those in our search and use them. I wasn't like familiar with the syntax as much, but now we have those documented in our docs, and I plan to add them directly to the search panel so that people can just reference them right away and be more empowered to like find what they need. That was an exciting contribution recently. the Git chat Twitter. That's where we announce all our downtime, and we also have our releases ping there. So anytime we put something on staging, anytime we put something on production, we announce that Gitter 27 whatever is out. Here's the change log.
Is there a status page for Gitter?
There isn't a. Is there a status page? Not publicly. There is a health check endpoint people could use, but of course that's random API thing.
Okay.
We use GitLab itself as the doc site, so we don't worry about hosting it somewhere or having a static site. Just whatever markdown, like it renders good enough here. So this is what we link to all our users. API, I mentioned before, that people make their own stuff with. In terms of GitLab integration, you can sign in with GitLab. You can paste issue links and merge request links, and they get decorated into this fancy popover thing, and the color indicates whether it's open or closed. You can create communities and rooms based on your projects, and the permissions get inherited. So like maintainers or admins, and whether it's private, you can like just inherit those same sort of things, and the integrations are set up in the sidebar. And then most recently, we added the Tanuki logo to the left menu, and this links off to the main marketing site, about.gitlab.com. But we definitely want to add more integration in the future. There's a whole epic that I should link here about GitLab integration. How we deploy.
So that's the logo behind you. I just noticed that.
Yep, the Gitter logo
Is it
behind me.
supposed to be a T for troop?
It's supposed to be, I think, a waving hand person. And I'm not sure of the origin really. It's just, it's before my time, so I'm not sure. We deploy new code and releases through GitLab CI. So even the community can see the pipelines like pop up and deploying production code. It was a bit scary to set up, of course, because like you're in public with secrets and stuff. It's like, I don't want to do anything weird with all this log output. But it's really cool to see where I can just like tweet the link and people can follow along on the release when I'm doing productions. Like they see the pipeline running, and then I just press deploy prod and it all flows out. We use Git flow for the repository, which means that develop is like the main developing branch where you merge everything into. And this is how different branches are deployed to different environments. We have a beta environment, which is completely separate database from production. And it has a snapshot of our database from a long time ago. So we have data to play with. And when we like test features on there, we're able to like, oh, I can switch them with a bunch of rooms, add, scroll a bunch of messages, and everything is easy to see. It's just public. Like we stripped out all the sensitive private stuff. It's just all public messages over there. And it's available to the, like, it's not behind any authentication wall, so anyone can view it, but it's definitely just meant for internal use. Feature branches, those can deploy to beta staging, so you can test them, and you can switch between beta and beta staging with just a cookie bookmarklet toggle. The develop branch, it gets deployed to beta. Just as a sanity check, you can switch between them and see like, okay, is my beta staging feature branch just broke compared to the sort of more stable develop branch? The master branch doesn't really have a purpose. It just gets back merged into whenever you do a release. The release branches get deployed to staging. So like we take what's on develop, okay, say it's good enough right here, we put it on the release branch and it gets deployed to staging. And then once it's been validate it on Sentry and making sure that things still are working as expected, we can merge it and tag the release, and those go straight to production. Security fixes, we have a whole document about it, but that's a bit different and probably won't be relevant to you.
What is the difference between beta and beta staging?
It's just a cookie toggle, and it just depends on what code is running. So it's similar to Gitter production and Gitter staging. It's just the upcoming sort of testing environment that you're able to test.
Okay.
On beta staging, you're testing like your random feature code that doesn't matter. And beta is just a way to test what's undeveloped so that, oh, I can go to beta itself, see if it's good, and then make a release branch, which goes to staging. More often than not, I'm using more beta staging than beta because I can test locally and run the end-to-end tests to make sure things are working. Plus, looking at Sentry is my main heuristic to make sure things are not sending random errors out. Development-wise, because I'm a solo developer and like trying to cut down on all the fluff, I'm totally willing to make drastic changes to pieces of the UI or code or anything. For example, like we cut out a bunch of animations across the site just because it's extra random code that I didn't want to worry about. So things just open immediately and stuff like that. There's a bunch of Gitter web packages in the package.json, but these are just locally in the repo like files. It's just a monorepo kind of submodule structure. So like this API client, you can just find it directly in the modules folder. API client, and that's the package. It's just code that we can independently move out to its own folder and have its own tests, and easier to compartmentalize different parts of logic. Main thing performance-wise is probably on the back end, and the main entity that gets created often and stuff is messages. So whenever I'm working on messages, I kind of double check to make sure I'm not like looping through all the messages and like, you know, processing things before it's served, trying to make it as simple as possible. Maybe let Mongo indexes handle the sorting for me or something like that.
You may have mentioned this, but I didn't see it. Is it everything built with Webpack?
Yes, all the code is bundled Webpack, and I think there's some Babel in there and stuff like that. I know I upgraded to Webpack 4 and from Webpack 1. That was a big jump.
Wow.
For the Vue.js code, we can lean on whatever sort of GitLab's doing. There are some differences, like the server-side rendering that we're doing, or like top-level Vuex store. I know that in GitLab, the stores are kind of individualized to the component right now. And the big, hairy, audacious goal is to have everything in the top level Vuex store. That way we can snapshot that little object and like send it over to us so we can like reproduce the bug and see what's going on, or be able to step through time. It's like the step before it is broken and then the step now, and oh, I'm sending out this random action that's breaking the whole app. Okay, easy to fix. Just makes things easier to debug instead of having to be like, what were you doing at the time when it broke? Trying to like the reproduction instructions is the main thing that you want to get when you're trying to issue triage stuff. Another difference is we're using less styles that are scoped to the Vue component, so they don't bubble up and mess with the global styles. And that's a really nice feature of having to be compatible with the backbone marionette stuff and the new Vue stuff, because all the backbone styles are kind of global and can affect everything on the page, versus these styles get generated with little tags that make them specific to these like elements here.
So the styles in the existing backbone code are mostly global regular CSS.
Yep, just plain less files that get compiled, and then we serve various pieces.
Is there any advanced, less kind of like features you used?
I know we use mixins sometimes. The string interpolation is nice every once in a while. But I have, in the past, there's some Sass features that'd be nicer, but I do like how less kind of acts more like CSS with their dependent order stuff. I think Sass is more of like a language where it runs as it goes instead of, I think the different, okay, it's hard to explain because I read this way in the past, but it's the way things are inherited, like variables. Just because they're like here or below the code doesn't mean they don't apply to the upper code, stuff like that. Backend server, I found this yesterday. There's a bunch of random readmes throughout the web app code that I found and was like, this is interesting. So this is a nice layered approach to how layered diagram of how the server works. Like first the auth, make sure that your request can go through. We figure out whether you can do it with the policies, serializers to make sure that we're not exposing data, the different things you can interact with. So like the API would be like third-party stuff in our own code. API web is kind of the private API that only we use. Handlers, that just means, I assuming, express routes that serve pages. And then just various, these would be like the modules behind the scenes, like avatars module, that kind of code. Sentry talked about for tracking errors down. We're using the GitLab Sentry instance. And then there is documentation around this, so it's easy to reference after this call again. This is one piece that Thomas, I know, wanted to understand, get a full understanding when he first joined, is how does a message go from my browser back to the server and then back down to all the clients? And this is the front end part of it where like the user submits a message, it hits the API, it gets stored in our database, but then also goes to our real-time Bayou cluster, which manages like clients subscribe from this direction, and then when messages come in, it decides whether it wants to send them back down to them. They receive it via the WebSocket connection from the Bayou cluster, and then we render it just like normal in the front end, Vue.js or Backbone stuff. Down here is a bunch of the details around it. For example, the chat view is still in Backbone, so we're using like the live collections there, which is kind of like a two-way binded collection from like the UI and the real time. Like if you change something on the client in the collection, it goes back up, but if the server changes something, it comes back down. That's just sending up the API request. So the API calls the service, the chat service here. And I can pull that up. New message. What is it? Chat message. Let's see if there's anything interesting in here that I can explain. Maybe this is like a Mongoose object. So we use Mongoose on top of Mongo to manage like required fields or validating stuff, I guess, if you don't do stuff quite right according to the schema. then it'll throw errors. I can show you the chat message schema. So for example, we track a chat message about like who it's from, which room it's to. Here's the weird troop stuff again. It's to which room it belongs to, basically. The parent ID, that's for threads nowadays, with tracking which parent message this message belongs to. All that sort of stuff. We have some spam detection in place. So if a user sends like the same message over and over, we just delete, like ban them and delete their messages. And we haven't had too many incidents of abuse in the recent months. We do have Roger and like a abuse room on Gitter that we handle any problems with, though.
Can users report abuse from the client?
Yep, there is a report message functionality now. So you can report, and that'll create reports in the backend, and those are kind of automatically moderated at a certain threshold. If someone reports you enough, like if you get enough reports against you, the system bans you, and if you continue posting in other places, then it just like removes you from the whole network.
So that's all automated?
Yep.
The auto ban?
It's not resistant to whatever the word is, targeted attacks. Like you could create a bunch of users and just report someone. It's not that smart. But I haven't seen a case for that. The only times I see people speaking up like, "Oh, it's banned, but I want to be unbanned," is when they are creating bots. It's like they're creating a bot and they just keep sending the message test over and over and over, and then their bot gets banned. And it's like, oh, we do have some issues tracking like how to better work around that. Like, of course, you probably shouldn't ban the admin of the room if they're testing in their own private room or something like that, but just haven't gotten to it. We track unreads individually. So if someone sends a message, like I can see that there's 6 unreads, and then it'll know where to go. And you can track up to 100 unreads on here. And we send out emails based on which messages are unread. So this just talks about how after it goes to the chat servers, it creates the Mongo database saving thing, and it adds an item to the unread store, which I think is Redis based. So we store that stuff in Redis, and then we can query a bunch of stuff really fast when we want to send out the email. In terms of like the Bayou side, where the server tries to figure out which clients it should send the new message to, because you don't want to send a new message in one room down to the random other rooms. So it goes into this Bayou events bridge, which kind of connects our Mongo database and the real-time cluster. So like whenever something happens in the database, we also want to tell the clients that, oh, this message updated, someone edited a message and we want to give you the latest, or something was added or deleted. That's where that connection is made, so that we don't like desync and show the most up-to-date information. Presence changes. We don't use presence. Presence is like what this little green dot represents. Like green means someone's around, orange is away. Like away from the tab, basically. Let's see here. And this sort of talks about the Bayou Fei protocol that I mentioned earlier about the Bayou Fei thing is just a protocol on top of WebSockets. This talks about the real-time client. We're using Halley to manage that protocol. And then that connects to our live collection. So like the real-time client has like a adapter sort of into our live collections that makes that all possible. And this is the sort of two-way data binding that I was talking about. It listens for the new messages, but then also can create new ones based on how you adjust the collection or send messages out. In terms of displaying it, it's just kind of normal backbone stuff. Like we have a chat message and a chat collection. This code hasn't been, like the backbone code hasn't been touched in a long time. So it's kind of jarring to go back when you have to do DOM updates yourself versus the Vue and React stuff we have nowadays. But hopefully some of that's changing soon. I hope that wasn't too hard to follow when I was going through that, because as I scroll through the thing, I know this sort of thing is very hard to get an understanding of when someone's scrolling through code, basically. But that's all I've prepared for this session. Is there like more questions that I can answer directly that you may have?
Maybe a little bit out of scope, but what is the relative priority of converting away the rest of the backbone stuff?
I think there's more priority of new stuff being in Vue.js, but because there's a Gitter redesign underway, that'll mean that the new pieces we develop in the redesign will be in Vue.js. So the UI will probably be Vue.js in the near future or near long-term future, like quarters wise. The design is kind of similar to what we have now, but it's not a good one to look at because it's so small. But the right toolbar will move into like collapsible sections, and then this displays sort of the same information we have now, but in the future, we can easily add more GitLab integration here, like, oh, here's the pipelines running for your project, stuff like that. Simplifying the chat header relationship compared to the room details. Currently on Gitter, this sort of information is global in terms of the profile, but then also room relevant, which doesn't always make it obvious of like which controls control what. So just making the global header actually global for actions there, and then making the room header specific to the room. The left menu is a bit simplified. So we got rid of the menu bar instead of these different states. Search, for example, has moved to the top. And then these lists will be like more relevant to you because mentions, you of course want to see mentions, they'll be at the top, and make them just scrollable that way instead of a long list. There is some filters, like the people one-to-one filter, but we'll have the similar thing right here. And then the chat actions will be displayed directly instead of under a hamburger menu, which makes a lot more sense now that we have threads. Because before, those actions were kind of seldom used. Like deleting a message is not always what you want to do right away, but starting a thread is an action you kind of just want to hop on and reply to someone. So big changes. This milestone, I plan to work on the right toolbar. So you'll probably see some merge requests come your way on Vue.js right toolbar. And I'm guessing I'll probably put that behind a feature toggle, have the old one and the new one in place, but then go to just have a feature toggle on next.gitter.im to toggle the new one versus the old one. This is what I did with the left menu when I did that Vue.js refactor. The old one, the new one were side by side, and then you could people who wanted to try it out, experiment, could turn it on, and we also were able to collect bugs that way. And then once we were happy with it, put it out generally available and remove the feature toggle.
What do you use for feature flags? Is it GitLabs or something homegrown, or?
I think it's called fflip, but I'm not sure what fflip is from. It looks like it's our own package because Supreme Cow is Andrew Newdigate. So it looks like he made a package around that. Yep. That's someone else. I don't know that person. But Andrew's maybe it's because he never got the namespace. That's why we're using the repo. Or it's possible that this was under our private NPM registry before NPM had namespaces.
We might have forked it to, and he's running a specific kind of like, because I see that fflip one there was last updated 4 years ago. So he might have forked it and made changes and then, just running against that version.
Definitely possible. I was just checking if the fork was still available here, but I don't see it. It looks like it was forked under his name or something. I can check. Usually when we fork stuff for the Gitter project, we just put it under the Gitter HQ namespace. Yep, forked. Okay, correct. Cool. I do know there's some packages that Andrew did write though for our stuff. And some other users still use them. Okay. I think we're just about on time anyway. And that's all that I've prepared. So we can cut it off and things right here.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for the overview, Eric. I think from a next step point of view, just picking both Chad and me on MRs as they become ready, and it might take us a few MRs to really just get in the groove of things, get familiar with where things are, and maybe even if we feel like one or two MRs that we kind of like do a sync call will usually take us through it as well. Just to get familiar with it, we can do that and record that as well. But I think this really helps just to create that overall context of the application. So thanks for this.
I also
I know. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'll try to add as much context and comments around the merge requests as possible, but if I forget something or if something's not understandable, feel free to just ask for more information on any aspects.
So I know we're almost at time, but one question I had is like, what is an example of a recent thing that you wish a reviewer would have caught that you didn't catch yourself before it went out? Do you have one?
Yeah, so recently this toggle was small. I can try to find the issue here. Like before I went on break, we regressed on this one point on the left menu where the toggle was kind of invisible. Toggle? Maybe not popularity, that's the problem.
You got
Hard
two
to see.
T's in your search too.
So this was like super tiny, and that's just a small thing, but that I would have caught that if I was just paying more attention to the left menu in general. I'll try to think of a bigger one. Let me look at the change log. Change. Oh, I know one. So when I was doing GitLab based communities, I added the GitLab project service. Project. Can't see my search. That's the problem. The Zoom thing's in the way. And instead of hitting the GitLab API that fetched my projects or projects I have access to, I was hitting the endpoint that fetched all projects. So, or all public projects. So every time someone was signed up with GitLab and trying to create a room, they were fetching like 400 pages of GitLab projects before the server would just crash and be like, nope, I can't. The paginator would just go forever until the GitLab API would end, but it would never end because there's millions of projects, thousands of projects on GitLab that you would have to get through to possibly finish. But that was just a case of using the wrong API endpoint and maybe bad testing. But first, the tests I wrote were passing, so that's the problem basically. I wrote tests, but
that running against a production environment.
Yeah. Project service. Let's see if I can find. Yeah, /API projects. I didn't realize it fetched all projects versus your own projects. We have a similar GitHub repo service, and the endpoint that's similar to that fetches only your own stuff. So I was basing everything off that, and it didn't work the same. So ran into big issues there.
So the two general categories of those were a visual UI that wouldn't, a visual regression that wouldn't be caught by testing, and something that only occurred with a production scale of data.
Yep. Okay, I think that's
Okay.
good.
Thanks.
I guess I'll sign it off there then. Thanks for coming to this and trying to understand as best as possible about Gitter.
Thank you. This was an extremely thorough job. Good
Thanks,
job.
Eric.
All right.
Cool.
See ya.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.